The slam of the screen door echoed the hollow ache in Susan's chest. The familiar scent of baking bread, usually a comfort, felt suffocating today. Sunlight, filtering through the kitchen window, painted stripes across the worn linoleum floor, but the warmth couldn't reach the chill that had settled deep within her. She slumped onto a kitchen chair, the vinyl cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the burning shame that still crawled up her throat. Just another day, she thought, the words a bitter taste on her tongue. Another day of invisibility punctuated by Diana's cruel laughter. How was school today? Her mother's voice, gentle and laced with concern, broke through Susan's internal storm. Fine, Susan mumbled, her gaze fixed on the scuffed toes of her saddle shoes. The lie felt heavy, a lead weight in her stomach. Fine. Like shattered glass is fine. Like being erased, piece by piece is fine. She knew her mother would press if she sensed a crack in the facade, and Susan didn't have the energy to construct the elaborate, false narrative of a normal day. Her mother placed a plate of warm cookies on the table, their sweet aroma doing little to dispel the bitter taste of the afternoon. Susan picked one up, the familiar action a small comfort, a fleeting sense of normalcy. Just blend in, she reminded herself. Don't be noticed. Don't give them any reason. The thought trailed off, unfinished, a constant refrain in the silent soundtrack of her life. Her mother busied herself at the sink, the rhythmic clinking of dishes a familiar backdrop to Susan's silent turmoil. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, filled with unspoken words and carefully concealed emotions. Susan could feel her mother's gaze on her, a silent question hanging in the air. She took a small bite of the cookie, the sweetness strangely at odds with the churning in her stomach. Just swallow it down, she thought, the words echoing the familiar act of suppressing her feelings. Your grandpa called, her mother finally said, her voice a carefully neutral tone. Susan looked up, a flicker of interest sparking in her dull eyes. He's coming for dinner on Sunday. The words hung in the air, a sudden shift in the atmosphere, a crack of light in the gray landscape of Susan's world. Grandpa Will is coming, she repeated softly, the name a balm to her raw emotions. A small smile, hesitant yet genuine, touched her lips. The thought of her grandfather, with his twinkling eyes and booming laughter, filled the hollow space within her with a warmth that the afternoon sun couldn't provide. He saw her, truly saw her, not the shy, awkward girl the world perceived, but the girl who dreamed of melodies and whispered lyrics to the wind. He'll ask about my singing, she thought, a blush warming her cheeks. He was the only one who knew, the only one who had heard the melodies that poured from her heart when she thought she was alone. He encouraged her, nurtured the fragile flame of her passion, a flame constantly threatened by the cold winds of Diana's ridicule and her own crippling self-doubt. He was her safe harbor, the one place where she could be herself, where the music inside her could flow freely, unburdened by fear or judgment. The image of Diana's sneering face flashed through her mind, a jarring contrast to the comforting thought of her grandfather. She'll find a way to ruin it, a small voice whispered in the back of her mind. She always does. Diana, with her effortless charm and razor-sharp wit, held a strange power over Susan, a power that stemmed not from physical strength, but from an uncanny ability to exploit her insecurities, to expose her vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Susan closed her eyes, trying to push the image away, to hold onto the fragile hope that her grandfather's visit would bring. He would tell her stories, his voice raspy with age, yet filled with the vibrant echoes of his past, stories of smoky jazz clubs and late-night jam sessions, stories that painted a world of music and freedom, a world she longed to be a part of. He would listen to her sing, his eyes filled with pride, his words of encouragement a soothing balm to her wounded spirit. She imagined sitting on the porch swing with him, the evening air filled with the scent of honeysuckle and the gentle strumming of his old guitar. He would tell her about the power of music, how it could transcend words, how it could heal the deepest wounds and connect souls in a way nothing else could. He would remind her of her own strength, the strength she didn't even know she possessed, the strength that lay dormant within her, waiting to be awakened. Maybe, just maybe, she thought, a flicker of defiance igniting within her. Maybe this time will be different. Maybe this time, the warmth of his presence, the strength of his belief in her, would be enough to shield her from the chilling winds of Diana's cruelty, enough to fan the embers of her passion into a flame that could burn bright enough to illuminate her own path. The last rays of the Ohio sun painted stripes across the worn wooden floorboards of Susan's room, a fading melody of apricot and rose. Dust motes danced in the golden light, a silent, swirling ballet to the music spilling from the small record player perched precariously on her dresser. Ella Fitzgerald's voice, rich and velvety, filled the small space, wrapping around Susan like a comforting shawl. A tisket, a tasket, the familiar melody vibrated through the air, a comforting rhythm in the quiet solitude of the evening. Susan sat hunched over her school books, the history textbook open before her, a dense forest of dates and names that refused to take root in her mind. Her fingers traced the lines of a paragraph about the War of 1812, but her thoughts were elsewhere. They drifted on the currents of Ella's voice, carried away to a place where words held melody and silence held its own kind of music. School, with its harsh whispers and judging stares, seemed a million miles away. Here, in the sanctuary of her room, she could breathe. The music swelled, Ella's voice reaching a crescendo, and Susan's hand instinctively tapped a rhythm on the worn cover of her textbook. A small, hesitant hum escaped her lips, a silent echo of the music in her soul. She glanced nervously at the closed door, a familiar wave of self-consciousness washing over her. Even within the confines of her own room, the fear of being overheard, of being judged, lingered like a persistent shadow. A sigh escaped her lips, a whisper lost in the music. Why was it so easy to disappear into the melodies, to let the music consume her, yet so difficult to simply exist, to occupy space without shrinking, without apology? The question echoed in the quiet spaces of her heart, a constant, nagging refrain. The record reached the end of the side, the needle scratching softly against the vinyl, a gentle reminder of the world outside the music. Susan reached out, her fingers hovering over the record player. A flicker of hesitation, a fleeting moment of doubt, before she carefully flipped the record and lowered the needle once more. As the music started again, this time a slower, more melancholic tune, Susan's fingers began to tap more insistently on the textbook. Her foot started to sway, keeping time with the rhythm. The hum that had escaped her lips earlier grew bolder, transforming into a soft, almost inaudible murmur of the lyrics. She closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her, erasing the anxieties of the day, the sting of Diana Wellington's cruel laughter, the weight of her own perceived inadequacies. In the darkness behind her eyelids, a different Susan emerged. Not the shy, bookish girl who stumbled over her words and avoided eye contact, but someone vibrant, confident, alive with the music. The murmur grew louder, gaining strength and resonance. The words flowed from her lips, no longer hesitant whispers, but a clear, powerful voice that resonated with emotion. She sang along with Ella, her voice blending seamlessly with the recording, matching the legendary singer's phrasing and intonation with an uncanny accuracy. It was a voice that held both vulnerability and strength, a voice that hinted at hidden depths and unspoken dreams. In the privacy of her room, with no audience but the dust motes dancing in the fading sunlight, Susan Davis wasn't just singing. She was becoming. The music was a conduit, a channel through which her true self could finally emerge. The shyness, the fear, the self-doubt, all melted away, replaced by a fierce, unwavering certainty. In this moment, she was not the girl who hid in the shadows. She was the music itself, pure and untainted. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the textbook, her knuckles white against the worn cover. A strange mixture of exhilaration and terror coursed through her veins. This power, this voice, it was both a gift and a burden. It was a secret she had guarded fiercely, a part of herself she had never dared to share with the world. The thought of revealing this hidden part of herself, of exposing her vulnerability to the harsh scrutiny of others, filled her with a deep, unsettling fear. Yet, beneath the fear, a flicker of something else began to ignite. A spark of defiance, a whisper of hope. What if, just what if, she could find the courage to share this gift, to let her voice be heard? What if, in the sharing, she could finally break free from the shackles of her own self-imposed limitations? The music faded, the final notes hanging in the air like a question mark. Susan opened her eyes, blinking against the encroaching darkness. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with unspoken possibilities. She sat there for a long moment, the echoes of her own voice still resonating within her. The image of Diana Wellington's sneering face flashed in her mind, a stark reminder of the world that awaited her outside the sanctuary of her room. But this time, the fear didn't consume her. This time, something else stirred within her, a flicker of resolve, a nascent strength that whispered of a future where her voice, finally unleashed, could drown out the whispers of doubt and fear. The afternoon sun, a hazy smear of amber through the dusty classroom windows, cast long shadows across the worn wooden desks. Dust motes danced in the golden rays, illuminating the air thick with the scent of chalk and teenage restlessness. Susan Davis, hunched over her textbook, traced the looping script of the poem with a numb finger, her mind miles away from Robert Frost's snowy woods. She was lost in the familiar labyrinth of her own thoughts, a place of quiet anxieties and whispered hopes. The drone of Mrs. Peterson's voice, reciting the intricacies of the American Revolution, washed over her like a gentle tide, a comforting background hum to the silent symphony playing within her. A sudden shift in the classroom's energy jolted Susan from a reverie. The low murmur of adolescent chatter rose a few decibels, a subtle change that spoke volumes to Susan's finely tuned sensitivity. Mrs. Peterson's voice sharpened, cutting through the rising tide of noise. "Attention, students," she announced, her tone laced with a hint of weariness. "As you all know, the annual Spring Showcase is fast approaching." Susan's stomach tightened. The Spring Showcase, a platform for talent, a stage for dreams. Or, in Susan's case, a potential minefield of social awkwardness and crippling self-consciousness. She instinctively shrank further into her seat, hoping to become invisible, a shadow amongst shadows. "Sign-ups for performances close this Friday," Mrs. Peterson continued, her voice regaining its usual patient cadence. "So, if you haven't already, please see me after class to register." A wave of excited whispers rippled through the room. Susan felt a prickle of envy, a sharp pang of longing for the effortless confidence that seemed to radiate from her classmates. She clutched her textbook tighter, the rough paper a small comfort in the face of her mounting anxiety. A high-pitched, self-assured voice cut through the classroom chatter. "My mother is donating the refreshments again this year," Diana Wellington announced, her words dripping with a saccharine sweetness that never failed to set Susan's teeth on edge. Susan's gaze flickered involuntarily towards Diana. She sat perched on the edge of her desk, a queen holding court, her blonde hair gleaming under the afternoon sun. Diana's smile, wide and dazzling, felt less like an expression of genuine joy and more like a carefully constructed mask, a weapon wielded with practiced ease. Susan knew that smile. It was the smile of a predator, a subtle display of dominance. The whispers around the room intensified, laced now with admiration and a touch of awe. Diana basked in the attention, her eyes glittering with satisfaction. Susan's stomach churned with a familiar mix of resentment and fear. Diana's casual announcement about the refreshments wasn't just about the food. It was a subtle reminder of her family's wealth, their influence, their position within the social hierarchy of the small town. It was a silent declaration of power, a power that Diana wielded with ruthless efficiency. "I've heard Diana is doing a dance routine with Betty and Linda," a girl behind Susan whispered, her voice hushed with excitement. Susan's heart sank. Of course, Diana would be performing. Diana excelled at everything she did, effortlessly gliding through life with an air of untouchable grace. Susan imagined Diana on stage, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight, her movements fluid and captivating. The image tightened the knot of envy in Susan's chest. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to quell the rising tide of self-doubt. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind, a gentle reminder of the melody that resided within her, a melody waiting to be unleashed. But the fear, the crippling fear of judgment, held her captive, silencing the song before it could even reach her lips. She stole another glance at Diana, who was now engaged in an animated conversation with her friends, her laughter ringing out, bright and carefree. Susan felt a pang of something akin to despair. How could she, a shy, bookish girl who felt more comfortable in the company of fictional characters than her own peers, ever hope to compete with someone like Diana? The bell rang, signaling the end of class. Susan gathered her books, her movements slow and deliberate, a shield against the rush of students eager to escape the confines of the classroom. As she made her way towards the door, she felt Diana's gaze on her back, a tangible weight that made her skin prickle. She didn't turn around, but she could feel the unspoken challenge in Diana's stare, the subtle undercurrent of animosity that always seemed to simmer between them. Susan slipped out of the classroom, the noise and chatter fading behind her as she walked down the quiet hallway. The afternoon sun, now a fiery orange, cast long shadows that stretched before her like a path into the unknown. She took a deep breath, the cool air a welcome contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the classroom. The spring showcase loomed ahead, a daunting prospect filled with both fear and a flicker of fragile hope. The melody within her stirred, a hesitant whisper in the silence of her soul. The bell's shrill shriek sliced through the stagnant hallway air, releasing a torrent of students from their afternoon confinement. Susan, clutching her worn copy of Little Women, hugged the locker-lined wall, hoping to become invisible in the chaotic flow. The scent of floor wax and stale sandwiches clung to the air, a familiar, vaguely nauseating aroma that always seemed to intensify after the final bell. She just wanted to slip out unnoticed, to reach the sanctuary of her grandfather's porch swing and the comforting melody of his old jazz records. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. A hand, sharp and cold as ice, clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around. Susan's breath hitched, the familiar lurch of fear twisting in her stomach like a live wire. Diana Wellington, flanked by her two ever-present shadows, Tiffany and Brittany, stood before her, their expressions a chilling blend of amusement and malice. Diana's eyes, the color of glacial ice, bored into her, sending a shiver down Susan's spine. "Why me?" she thought, the question echoing the silent scream trapped within her chest. It was a constant refrain, a bewildered plea to a world that seemed determined to single her out for its casual cruelty. "Well, if it isn't Susie Songbird," Diana sneered, her voice dripping with saccharine mockery. The nickname, a cruel twist on her name, sent a wave of heat flushing up Susan's neck. She could feel their gazes, sharp and dissecting, stripping away her carefully constructed layers of invisibility. She longed to disappear, to melt into the faded linoleum beneath her feet. "We never see you at any school events," Tiffany chimed in, her voice a perfect echo of Diana's disdain. "Too good for the rest of us." Susan's heart hammered against her ribs. No, she wanted to scream, "I'm not too good. I'm terrified." But the words remained locked in her throat, choked by the ever-present knot of fear. She could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the oppressive force of their collective gaze. It was a familiar feeling, this suffocating sense of being trapped beneath a microscope, every flaw magnified, every insecurity exposed. Brittany giggled, a high-pitched, brittle sound. "Chuck said he heard you singing," she said, her eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "Said you sounded like a dying cat." The laughter that followed was a physical blow, a wave of sound that washed over Susan, leaving her gasping for air. Her grandfather's words, usually a source of comfort, echoed hollowly in her mind. "Your voice is a gift, Susan. Don't let anyone steal it from you." But how could she hold on to a gift that felt like a curse? A gift that only seemed to attract ridicule and pain? The image of Chuck, the school star quarterback, his face contorted in exaggerated disgust, flashed through her mind. Shame, hot and suffocating, coiled in her gut. She had thought she was alone, her voice lost in the quiet solitude of the abandoned music room. But now, the secret was out, twisted and weaponized by Diana's cruel tongue. Diana leaned closer, her breath hot against Susan's ear. "Maybe you should stick to reading, Susie. Leave the performing to the rest of us." Her voice was a venomous whisper, a poison dart aimed directly at Susan's heart. The hallway, once a blur of noise and movement, seemed to fall silent. Susan could hear the frantic thump of her own heart, the shallow rasp of her breath. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like a butterfly pinned beneath a collector's glass. The hallway lights seemed to flicker, casting distorted shadows that danced on the walls, mirroring the chaotic storm raging within her. Diana's hand tightened on her shoulder, her grip like a vice. Susan flinched, her body instinctively recoiling from the contact. She wanted to run, to escape the suffocating weight of their presence. But her feet felt rooted to the spot, heavy and immobile. The books clutched in her arms suddenly felt like a shield, a fragile barrier against the world's harsh judgment. "Don't even think about auditioning for the spring showcase," Diana hissed, her voice low and menacing. "You'll just embarrass yourself." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken threat. Susan's mind raced. The spring showcase. She had dreamt of singing on that stage, of letting her voice soar, of sharing the music that lived within her. But now, Diana's words had poisoned the dream, twisting it into a nightmare of public humiliation. The thought of standing on that stage, exposed to the judging eyes of the entire school, filled her with a paralyzing dread. She could already hear the whispers, the laughter, the cruel taunts echoing in her ears. Diana released her grip, a final, dismissive gesture. She turned, a smirk playing on her lips, and rejoined her entourage, their laughter fading into the receding tide of students. Susan stood there, frozen in place, the echoes of their words reverberating in the hollow space they left behind. The hallway, once again alive with the buzz of activity, felt colder, emptier. She closed her eyes, willing herself to disappear, to become invisible once more. But the image of Diana's face, her eyes glittering with cruel amusement, remained etched behind her eyelids, a constant reminder of her vulnerability. The hallway lights seemed to dim, mirroring the shadows that had gathered in her heart. The metallic clang of lockers echoed through the bustling hallway, a discordant symphony of slamming metal and chattering voices. Susan navigated the crowded space, the scent of stale cafeteria food mingling with the faint aroma of hairspray. She reached her locker, the faded blue paint chipped and scarred, a testament to years of hurried hands and careless slams. Her fingers fumbled with the combination. The familiar clicks a small comfort in the chaotic whirlwind of Roosevelt Middle School. As the lock sprung open, a crisp white sheet of paper fluttered to the ground. A knot tightened in Susan's stomach. It wasn't a note from Sarah, its edges too perfect, too official. She bent down, her fingers tracing the embossed school crest, a performance registration form. Her name, Susan Davis, printed neatly beside the category, vocal performance. A wave of dizziness washed over her. No, this couldn't be right. She hadn't signed up for anything. The spring showcase was Diana's territory, a dazzling spectacle of coordinated dance routines and soaring solos, a stage where Susan would rather disappear than be seen. Her breath hitched, a cold dread settling in her chest. Only one person could be behind this. Diana Wellington, her blonde hair a gleaming halo in the morning light, materialized beside her, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. "Surprise!" she chirped, her voice dripping with false enthusiasm. "Isn't it exciting? You're going to be a star." Susan stared at her, the words catching in her throat. Her mind raced, searching for an explanation, a way out. "You can't just sign me up without asking," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The noise of the hallway seemed to amplify her vulnerability, each slam and shout a reminder of her exposed position. Why is she doing this? She knew Diana's games, the subtle jabs and calculated humiliations, but this felt different, a more deliberate cruelty. Diana's smile didn't falter. "Oh, but I did ask," she countered, her eyes glinting with a malicious amusement. "I was just doing you a favor, Susan. You know you've got a voice. It's a shame to hide it." Each word, laced with feigned concern, felt like a tiny pinprick, deflating the fragile bubble of Susan's composure. "A favor?" Susan thought, the absurdity of the claim making her stomach churn. Diana, doing her a favor? The girl who had made her life a misery for the past 2 years? It was a cruel joke, a twisted game designed to break her. "I don't want to sing," Susan said, her voice gaining a slight tremor. The fluorescent lights above seemed to hum with a nervous energy, mirroring the frantic beat of her heart. She clutched the registration form, the paper crinkling in her grip. "Don't be silly," Diana retorted, her voice laced with mock impatience. "It's all arranged. I already told Mrs. Whitmore how excited you were." The weight of Diana's words pressed down on Susan, suffocating her. Mrs. Whitmore, the respected music teacher, a former opera singer with an intimidating aura of authority. The idea of disappointing her, of being seen as ungrateful, added another layer of anxiety to the already overwhelming situation. Susan's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Say something, do something, a voice inside her screamed, but her body felt frozen, trapped in the spotlight of Diana's cruel charade. The scent of Diana's perfume, a cloying sweetness, suddenly became nauseating. She took a step back, her hand instinctively rising to her chest, as if to protect herself from the invisible blows. "Booty can't," Susan stammered, her voice barely audible above the din of the hallway. The faces of passing students blurred into an indistinguishable mass, their laughter and conversations a distant hum. She felt isolated, alone in the crowded space. Diana's smile widened, revealing a hint of triumph. "Oh, but you can, Susan," she purred, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And you will. Think of it as a challenge, a chance to finally prove yourself." Prove herself? To whom? To Diana? To the judging eyes of the entire school? The thought sent a shiver of fear down her spine. The hallway seemed to shrink, the walls closing in on her, the lockers morphing into prison bars. She longed for the sanctuary of her grandfather's study, the comforting scent of old books and pipe tobacco, the soothing melody of his jazz records. She longed for his wisdom, his quiet strength, a lifeline in this turbulent sea of adolescent cruelty. Diana leaned closer, her voice a venomous whisper in Susan's ear. "Everyone's expecting a show, Susan. Don't disappoint them." She patted Susan's shoulder, a gesture of feigned sympathy that felt like a brand. Then, with a toss of her hair and a final, triumphant smile, she turned and disappeared into the throng of students, leaving Susan standing there, numb with shock and fear, the crumpled registration form clutched tightly in her hand like a death sentence. The metallic clang of a distant locker echoed through the hallway, a sharp, metallic sound that resonated with the hollow ache in Susan's chest. The afternoon sun, a hazy gold through the music room's tall windows, painted dust motes dancing in the air. Susan sat perched on the edge of a worn piano stool, the polished wood cool beneath her fingertips. The scent of beeswax and old paper, a familiar comfort in this room, did little to soothe the tremor in her chest. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to echo the frantic beat of her heart. Across from her, Mrs. Whitmore, her silver hair catching the light like a halo, beamed. Susan's stomach clenched. She had rehearsed this conversation countless times in the echoing chambers of her mind, each iteration ending in a different, equally unsatisfactory way. "Susan, dear," Mrs. Whitmore began, her voice a warm alto that resonated with the same richness as the grand piano behind her. "I'm absolutely thrilled you've decided to participate in the showcase." Susan's carefully constructed opening line crumbled. She had envisioned a firm, decisive declaration of withdrawal, a swift, clean cut. But faced with the genuine delight in Mrs. Whitmore's eyes, the words caught in her throat. How could she shatter this gentlewoman's enthusiasm? How could she confess that her entry wasn't born of courage, but of Diana Wellington's cruel machinations? The shame coiled in her gut, a bitter serpent squeezing the air from her lungs. "About that, Mrs. Whitmore," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Her gaze dropped to her hands, tracing the faint lines on her palms. Each line seemed a tangled path, leading her further into this inescapable web. "Yes, dear." Mrs. Whitmore leaned forward, her expression encouraging. Susan could feel the weight of her gaze, a warm pressure that both comforted and suffocated. "Two haven't really decided." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. Each word felt like a betrayal, not just of Mrs. Whitmore's trust, but of her own desperate desire to escape this predicament. Her internal monologue raged, a cacophony of conflicting voices. Tell her the truth." One voice screamed, "But what if she doesn't believe you?" Another countered, whispering insidious doubts. "Diana will make your life a living hell." Mrs. Whitmore's smile softened. "It's wonderful to see quiet students step into the spotlight," she said, her voice laced with a gentle understanding that pierced through Susan's carefully constructed defenses. "I know it can be daunting, but trust me, dear, the rewards are immeasurable." A wave of nausea washed over Susan. Rewards? The only reward she anticipated was the venomous satisfaction in Diana's eyes as she watched Susan crumble on stage. The image flashed in her mind, vivid and cruel. The snickers, the whispers, the pointed fingers. Her breath hitched, a strangled gasp lost in the quiet hum of the music room. She had to get out of this, had to find a way to extricate herself from this suffocating situation. But she began, her voice trembling, a fragile butterfly struggling against a hurricane. She looked up, searching Mrs. Whitmore's face for a flicker of doubt, a hint of suspicion, anything that would offer her an escape route. But there was only kindness, a genuine, unwavering belief in her potential. A potential Susan herself couldn't fathom, a talent she felt more like a burden than a gift. Grandpa Will's words echoed in her mind, a soothing balm against the burning shame. "Music is a language, Susan. A way to speak what's in your heart when words fail." But her heart was a battlefield, a chaotic clash of fear and longing. What language could possibly translate that? "It's a big step, I know," Mrs. Whitmore continued, misinterpreting Susan's hesitation. "But I have a feeling you'll surprise us all, Susan. You have a remarkable gift." The words hung in the air, heavy with expectation. Susan's resolve, already fragile, began to crumble completely. Mrs. Whitmore's faith in her, undeserved as it was, felt like a lifeline in the turbulent sea of her anxiety. How could she disappoint this woman who saw something in her, something Susan herself couldn't even grasp? She closed her eyes, the image of Diana's triumphant smirk momentarily replaced by Grandpa Will's gentle smile. His unwavering belief in her, his quiet encouragement, resonated within her, a faint echo of hope in the deafening silence of her fear. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a sliver of truth in Mrs. Whitmore's words. Perhaps, hidden beneath layers of insecurity and self-doubt, there was a voice waiting to be heard. A slow, unsteady breath escaped her lips. The tremor in her chest hadn't subsided, but it felt different now, less like fear and more like anticipation. A strange, unfamiliar feeling began to bloom within her, a fragile seed of courage taking root in the barren landscape of her fear. She opened her eyes, meeting Mrs. Whitmore's gaze. The words of refusal remained unspoken, trapped in the labyrinth of her conflicting emotions. What song should I sing?" she asked, the words barely audible. Yet they resonated in the quiet room, a whisper of defiance against the oppressive silence that had held her captive for so long. The faintest hint of a smile touched her lips. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time, Susan felt a flicker of hope, a fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, she could face the music. The muted glow of the bedside lamp cast long, dancing shadows across Susan's bedroom walls, mimicking the chaotic flutter of her heart. Her schoolbooks lay scattered across the floral bedspread, forgotten relics of a simpler time, a time before Diana Wellington's cruel laughter had echoed in the school hallway, a time before the dreaded spring showcase had become her personal nightmare. She curled into herself, knees drawn up to her chest, the soft cotton of her pajamas offering little comfort against the icy grip of fear. The room, usually a sanctuary, felt like a prison cell, each tick of the clock a hammer blow against her fragile resolve. "I can't do this," she thought, the words a choked whisper in the confines of her mind. "I can't stand up there." In front of everyone, the image flashed before her, the blinding stage lights, the sea of faces, Diana's triumphant smirk, and a wave of nausea washed over her. It was a cruel paradox. Music, once her solace, had become the instrument of her torture. A soft knock on the door barely registered through the fog of her anxiety. "Susan," Sarah's voice, a gentle melody against the discord in her head, filtered through the wooden panels. "Can I come in?" Susan hesitated. The instinct to retreat, to burrow deeper into the protective shell of her solitude, warred with a desperate yearning for connection. "She won't understand," a cynical voice whispered in her mind. "No one understands." But Sarah's persistent, gentle rapping chipped away at her defenses. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, Susan pushed herself upright. "Come in," she mumbled, the words barely audible. Sarah slipped into the room, her presence a small beacon of warmth in the chilling darkness of Susan's fear. She sat on the edge of the bed, her gaze concerned as it swept over Susan's disheveled appearance. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft yet firm. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Susan managed a weak smile. "Worse," she breathed, the words heavy with unspoken dread. "Diana." Sarah's brow furrowed. She knew the history, the relentless taunts, the subtle jabs that chipped away at Susan's confidence like a sculptor chipping away at stone. "What has she done now?" The words tumbled out of Susan in a rush, a torrent of fear and frustration. The humiliation of the hallway incident, the forced agreement to sing, the crushing weight of expectation had all poured out, leaving her breathless and trembling. "I can't do this, Sarah," she repeated, her voice cracking. "Everyone will be watching. They'll laugh. They'll whisper. Diana will make sure of it." The thought of facing the crowd, of becoming the object of their ridicule, sent a fresh wave of panic through her. "I'll freeze," she thought, the image of herself standing paralyzed on stage, bathed in the harsh glare of the spotlight, solidifying into a terrifying certainty. "I'll forget the words. I'll ruin everything." Sarah listened patiently, her hand resting on Susan's arm, a silent anchor in the storm raging within her. When Susan finally subsided, Sarah squeezed her arm gently. "Then don't let her win," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. The simplicity of the words struck Susan with unexpected force. "Don't let her win." A flicker of defiance, small but potent, ignited within her. Had she really allowed Diana to dictate her life, to steal her joy, to silence her voice? A wave of shame washed over her, hot and bitter. "I've let fear control me for too long," she thought, the realization a painful but necessary truth. "I've let her turn my passion into a prison." "But I'm scared," Susan confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. The admission hung in the air, heavy with vulnerability. She looked at Sarah, searching her eyes for a flicker of judgment, a hint of dismissal. But there was only understanding, a quiet strength that resonated with her own buried resilience. "I know you are," Sarah replied softly, her gaze steady and reassuring. but you're also incredibly talented. Remember that time we sang together at the bonfire? You were amazing. Everyone was mesmerized. The memory, a fleeting moment of shared joy and uninhibited expression, sparked a faint warmth within Susan. Grandpa Will's words echoed in her mind. Music is a gift, Susan. Don't let fear steal it from you. His belief in her, unwavering and unconditional, had always been a source of strength. But now, faced with the daunting reality of the upcoming performance, his encouragement seemed distant, like a faint whisper carried on the wind. Sarah's voice broke through a reverie. Diana wants to see you fail. She wants to steal your voice. Don't let her. There was a steel in Sarah's usually gentle tone, a fierceness that surprised Susan. It mirrored a nascent strength within herself, a spark of defiance she hadn't realized existed. A fragile sense of calm settled over Susan, a temporary reprieve from the relentless onslaught of her anxiety. Sarah's words, simple yet profound, had pierced through the fog of her fear, revealing a glimmer of hope. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. The fear still lingered, a shadowy presence lurking in the corners of her mind. But for the first time since Diana's cruel proposition, Susan felt a flicker of something else, a nascent determination, a refusal to be silenced. The road ahead was still daunting, but she was no longer alone. And in that shared moment of understanding, in the quiet strength of Sarah's presence, Susan found a fragile seed of courage beginning to bloom. The aroma of rosemary and roasted chicken hung heavy in the air, a comforting blanket against the chill of the early spring evening. Steam curled lazily from the mashed potatoes, a miniature, ephemeral cloud mirroring the turmoil brewing inside Susan. She picked at her food, the familiar Sunday dinner ritual feeling strangely alien. The clinking of forks against china, usually a soothing soundtrack to their family meals, grated on her nerves, each metallic chime echoing the discord within her. She stole a glance at her grandfather, his face etched with the gentle wisdom of years, a silent question in his kind eyes. He knew. He always knew. Even without words, the unspoken connection between them vibrated with an almost tangible awareness. Her throat tightened. She couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. The pressure was mounting, a suffocating weight threatening to crush her from within. "You're awfully quiet today, Songbird." Grandpa Will's voice, a warm baritone seasoned with age, broke the silence. He didn't push, merely observed, offering an opening, a lifeline. His gaze held hers, steady and unwavering, a beacon in the storm raging inside her. Susan swallowed, the lump in her throat making it difficult to speak. Her fingers traced the rim of her water glass, the cool, smooth surface a stark contrast to the burning shame that threatened to consume her. "Diana, she tricked me." She finally managed, the words tumbling out in a rush, a torrent of suppressed emotion. The dam had broken, and the flood of humiliation, anger, and fear poured forth. "Tricked you?" Grandpa Will's brow furrowed slightly, his voice a soft rumble of concern. He placed his fork down, the gentle clink, a punctuation marked to her confession. His full attention was now on her, an unwavering spotlight that both terrified and comforted her. Susan recounted the entire ordeal, her voice trembling at times, the raw vulnerability of her narrative hanging heavy in the air. She described Diana's feigned friendship, the carefully orchestrated plan, the insidious manipulation that had led her to believe she was auditioning for a small, insignificant part in the spring showcase. The bitter taste of betrayal coated her tongue, each word a painful reminder of her own naivete. As Susan spoke, she watched her grandfather's face, searching for a hint of judgment, a flicker of disapproval. Instead, she saw only empathy, a deep understanding that resonated with her own pain. He listened with an intensity that made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time since the incident. When she finished, a heavy silence descended upon the room. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to amplify the emptiness, each tick a stark reminder of the agonizing slowness of time. She braced herself for his reaction, her stomach twisting into knots. Grandpa will lean back in his chair, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the dining room window. The silence stretched, taut with unspoken emotions. Susan held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Finally, he turned back to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. Diana's actions are a reflection of her own insecurities, Songbird, not a judgment of your worth. His voice was gentle but firm, a reassuring anchor in the turbulent sea of her emotions. Don't let her bitterness poison your spirit. He paused, his gaze softening. Remember what I told you about music, Susan? It's a language that transcends words, a bridge between hearts. His hand reached across the table, his fingers gently covering hers. The warmth of his touch was a grounding force, a tangible reminder of his unwavering support. When you play for yourself, that's practice. When you play for others, that's a gift. His words resonated deep within her, a gentle echo of a truth she had almost forgotten. The fear, the shame, the humiliation they began to recede, replaced by a flicker of something else, something akin to hope. I used to get stage fright too, he confessed, a surprising admission that drew her attention. He chuckled softly, the sound tinged with a hint of melancholy. Back in my jazz days, before your grandmother convinced me to settle down, there were times when the fear was so crippling, I thought I'd never be able to face an audience again. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a knowing glint. But then I realized something. The fear wasn't the enemy. It was a sign that I cared. It meant that what I was doing mattered. His words struck a chord within her. She had always viewed her fear as a weakness, a flaw that needed to be eradicated. But Grandpa Will's perspective offered a different interpretation, a way to reframe her anxiety into something positive, something empowering. The trick, he continued, his voice low and conspiratorial, is to channel that fear, to transform it into something else, into passion, into energy, into a connection with the music, with the audience. He squeezed her hand gently. Don't let Diana's cruelty silence your voice, Susan. Your gift is precious. Share it with the world. Don't let fear steal your joy. His words were a balm to her wounded spirit, a gentle nudge in the right direction. The knot in her stomach began to loosen, replaced by a nascent sense of determination. A small, fragile seed of courage began to sprout within her, nurtured by his unwavering belief in her. The fear was still there, a lurking shadow in the recesses of her mind. But now, alongside the fear, there was something else, a flicker of anticipation, a spark of excitement. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could do this. Perhaps she could find her voice, not just in music, but in life itself. The roasted chicken, the mashed potatoes, the Sunday dinner ritual, they all faded into the background. All that remained was the quiet strength of her grandfather's words, resonating within her, a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. The chipped paint on her bedroom ceiling, a swirling galaxy of faded pink roses, offered little comfort. Susan lay on her bed, the showcase program clutched in her hand, its crisp edges softened by nervous perspiration. Diana's mocking laughter echoed in her ears, a cruel soundtrack to her rising panic. A solo performance? Me? The thought was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, stealing her breath. She'd rather face a firing squad. Grandpa Will's words, usually a source of strength, felt distant and hollow. Find your voice, Susan. Easier said than done when that voice trembled at the mere thought of an audience, let alone one filled with judging eyes and whispered taunts. She closed her eyes, picturing Diana's triumphant smirk, the way her posse mirrored her every cruel gesture. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign of humiliation, and Susan was the unwilling star. She crumpled the program, the paper crackling in the suffocating silence of her room. Why had she agreed? A flicker of self-reproach, sharp and stinging, pierced through her anxiety. She knew why. The same reason she always succumbed to Diana's insidious pressure, a desperate, aching desire to belong, even if it meant being the court jester. The music room at Roosevelt Middle School was a sanctuary, a place where melodies whispered secrets and harmonies soared. But even here, amidst the comforting presence of worn pianos and dusty sheet music, Susan's fear clung to her like a second skin. Mrs. Whitmore's smile, though warm and encouraging, couldn't quite dispel the chill that settled in Susan's bones. "Let's try it again, Susan," she said, her voice a soothing balm against the raw edges of Susan's nerves. Susan nodded, her throat constricting. The first notes wavered, fragile and uncertain, like a bird taking its first hesitant flight. She could almost feel Diana's phantom presence, a sneering specter in the corner of the room. "See? I told you she was a joke." The thought made her stumble over the lyrics, her voice cracking. Shame, hot and suffocating, threatened to engulf her. She stopped, her hands clammy on the worn keys of the piano. "It's all right, Susan," Mrs. Whitmore said gently, her hand resting on Susan's shoulder. The touch, surprisingly firm, anchored Susan to the present. "You have a gift, Susan," Mrs. Whitmore continued, her voice unwavering. "A beautiful voice. You're just holding back." The days that followed were a blur of practice, each session a battleground between Susan's burgeoning talent and her crippling fear. Mrs. Whitmore's patience was a lifeline, her guidance a beacon in the swirling fog of Susan's anxiety. "Breathe, Susan," she'd say, her words a gentle reminder amidst the tumultuous storm within. "Focus on the music. Let it flow through you." Slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift within Susan. The fear, though still present, no longer held her captive. The music, once a source of terror, became a refuge, a place where she could express the emotions she kept bottled up inside. She poured her anxieties, her frustrations, her hopes into each note, each phrase. Her voice, initially hesitant and trembling, gained strength and clarity. There were still moments of doubt, times when Diana's taunts echoed in her mind, threatening to derail her progress. But now, a new voice emerged, a quiet whisper of defiance. "I won't let her win." The hallways of Roosevelt Middle School were a minefield. Each encounter with Diana and her entourage was a carefully calculated assault on Susan's fragile confidence. A tripped foot here, a whispered insult there, each act designed to chip away at her resolve. "Look who it is," Diana would sneer, her voice dripping with venom. "The little songbird, ready to chirp for us." Her friends would titter, their laughter like shards of glass. Susan's instinct was to shrink, to disappear into the background. But something had changed. A flicker of anger, a spark of defiance, ignited within her. She met Diana's gaze, her own eyes surprisingly steady. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken tension. Diana, momentarily thrown off balance, recovered quickly. "Just ignore them, Susan," Mrs. Whitmore advised, her voice calm and reassuring. "Focus on the music." And that's precisely what Susan did. The music became her shield, her armor against the slings and arrows of Diana's cruelty. She practiced relentlessly, pouring all her energy, all her emotion into the song. Each note was a small victory, a testament to her growing resilience. The fear hadn't vanished entirely, but it no longer held her captive. It was there, a dull ache in the background, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of anticipation, a quiet thrill of excitement. She was ready, not just ready to perform, but ready to face Diana, ready to face her fears, ready to find her voice. The floral wallpaper in Susan's room, usually a comforting presence, seemed to mock her with its cheerful indifference. Sunlight, filtering through the lace curtains, cast long shadows that danced like taunting specters. Each tick of the clock on her nightstand hammered a nail into the coffin of her remaining composure. Today was the day, the spring showcase. A knot twisted in her stomach, tight and unrelenting. Her reflection in the mirror offered little solace. A pale, thin girl stared back, eyes wide with apprehension. Was this really her? Was this the girl who was supposed to stand on a stage, in front of the entire school, and sing? The thought felt ludicrous, impossible. She'd rather face a firing squad. Her mother's voice, soft and reassuring, floated in from the hallway. "Susan, honey? Almost time to go." A wave of nausea washed over her. "Just a minute," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. She ran a trembling hand over the smooth fabric of her dress. It was a simple, pale blue cotton dress, chosen for its unobtrusiveness. Ironically, it now felt like a spotlight, highlighting her every flaw. She closed her eyes, her grandfather's words echoing in her mind. "Fear is a cage you build yourself, Susan. You hold the key." He had said that just last week, his hand warm over hers, his eyes filled with a quiet strength she longed to possess. He had given her a small, silver pin, shaped like a songbird. "Hold on to this," he'd whispered, "and remember your own song." Her fingers instinctively sought the pin, now fastened to the collar of her dress. The cool metal against her skin was a tangible link to his unwavering belief in her. It was a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. She took a deep, shaky breath and opened her eyes. The reflection in the mirror remained the same, but something within her had shifted. The fear was still there, a coiled serpent in her gut, but it no longer held her captive. A flicker of resolve, fragile yet persistent, began to burn within her. Downstairs, the aroma of her mother's freshly baked apple pie mingled with the scent of her father's pipe tobacco, a familiar and grounding combination. Her parents were waiting in the living room, their faces etched with a mixture of anticipation and concern. Seeing her, her mother's face broke into a warm smile. "You look beautiful, honey," she said, her voice filled with genuine pride. Her father, a man of few words, simply nodded in agreement, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Your grandpa's already saved us front row seats," he added, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. The drive to school was a blur of muted colors and muffled sounds. Susan sat in the back seat, lost in the labyrinth of her own thoughts. She replayed the melody in her head, the notes weaving a fragile tapestry against the backdrop of her anxiety. The lyrics, once a source of comfort, now seemed laden with a new weight, a weight of expectation. What if she forgot the words? What if her voice cracked? What if the possibilities, each more terrifying than the last, swirled around her like a swarm of angry bees? The bustling atmosphere of the school auditorium amplified her unease. The air buzzed with nervous energy. Students, dressed in their finest, milled around backstage, their voices a cacophony of excited chatter and last-minute rehearsals. The scent of hairspray and perfume hung heavy in the air, a strange cocktail of anticipation and fear. Susan retreated to a quiet corner, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Mrs. Whitmore, her music teacher, found her there, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "Susan, dear," she said, her voice a calming balm in the chaos. "You look lovely. Are you ready?" Susan managed a weak nod, her throat suddenly dry. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes, however, held not pity, but a quiet understanding. She placed a hand on Susan's shoulder, a gesture that conveyed more reassurance than any words could have. "Remember what we practiced, Susan," she said softly. "Breathe, feel the music, and let your voice soar." As Susan walked onto the stage, the spotlight felt like a physical force, pinning her in place. The sea of faces blurred into an indistinguishable mass. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. She squeezed her eyes shut, her fingers tightening around the silver songbird. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind, a lifeline in the turbulent sea of her fear. She took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs, and opened her eyes. The music began, a gentle piano melody that washed over her like a soothing wave. And then she sang. Her voice, at first hesitant, gradually gained strength and clarity, filling the auditorium with its pure, bell-like tones. The fear receded, replaced by a sense of calm focus. She was no longer Susan Davis, the shy, awkward girl. She was the song, the music, the voice that soared above the whispers and doubts, carrying with it a strength she never knew she possessed. The notes flowed from her, effortless and true, each one a testament to the journey she had taken, from the depths of her fear to the discovery of her own voice. And in that moment, she understood what her grandfather had meant. She held the key. She had unlocked the cage. The heavy velvet curtain felt strangely cold against her cheek. Susan pressed closer, the rough texture a counterpoint to the frantic thump-thump-thump of her heart against her ribs. The muffled sounds of the previous act, a tap-dancing duo, faded into a distant roar, replaced by the hushed anticipation of the audience beyond the curtain. She could smell the dust and aged wood of the backstage, a familiar scent now imbued with the sharp tang of her own fear. "Just breathe, Susan," Grandpa Will's voice echoed in her memory, a calming mantra against the rising tide of panic. But breathing felt impossible. Each inhale hitched halfway, trapped by a knot of anxiety that tightened with every passing second. Diana's cruel laughter, her mocking words, played on a loop in her mind, a venomous soundtrack to her mounting dread. Why did I agree to this? The question clawed at her, a desperate whisper in the echoing chamber of her thoughts. It was a naive hope, a fleeting belief that maybe, just maybe, she could prove them wrong. Prove Diana wrong. But now, standing mere inches from the spotlight's glare, all she felt was the crushing weight of her own vulnerability. Mrs. Whitmore's hand rested gently on her shoulder, a warm, reassuring presence in the cold backstage. "You're ready, Susan," she murmured, her voice a soothing balm against the chaotic symphony in Susan's head. "Remember what we practiced? Remember the story you want to tell?" The story? Susan's mind grasped at the thought. It wasn't just about the notes, the melody. It was about the yearning, the hope, the dream of a place somewhere over the rainbow. A place where troubles melted like lemon drops. A place she desperately longed for. A place far away from the sneers and whispers that haunted her days. The stage lights flickered, a silent signal. Mrs. Whitmore gave her shoulder a final squeeze and retreated into the shadows. Susan stood alone, bathed in the faint glow of the backstage lights, a solitary figure poised on the precipice of the unknown. The music began, a gentle piano intro, the familiar chords weaving a path through the labyrinth of her fear. She closed her eyes, picturing Grandpa Will's kind smile, his words of encouragement a lifeline in the turbulent sea of her anxiety. "Find your voice, Susan. Let it soar." Taking a shaky breath, she stepped onto the stage. The sudden burst of light was blinding, the vastness of the auditorium disorienting. A sea of faces blurred before her, a silent, expectant audience. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. For a moment, she froze, the knot of fear tightening its grip, threatening to choke the melody in her throat. But then something shifted. The familiar melody, the comforting lyrics, began to unravel the tangled threads of her fear. Somewhere over the rainbow, the first notes escaped her lips, fragile, tentative. Her voice trembled, a delicate butterfly testing its wings. But as she continued, a surprising strength began to bloom within her. The fear didn't disappear entirely. It was still there, lurking in the shadows of her mind. But now, it was accompanied by something else. A flicker of determination, a spark of defiance. She was no longer the shy, timid girl hiding in the library. She was a storyteller, a conduit for the yearning that resonated within her soul. With each note, her voice grew stronger, clearer, soaring above the hushed whispers of the audience. She closed her eyes, losing herself in the music, the world outside the stage fading into a hazy backdrop. The melody flowed through her, a river of emotion pouring out into the silent auditorium. She sang of dreams and hopes, of faraway lands and shimmering skies, of a place where troubles ceased to exist. She sang of her own longing, her own desire for escape, her own yearning for a world beyond the confines of her fear. The final notes hung in the air, delicate, ethereal, slowly fading into the silence of the auditorium. For a moment, there was nothing. A breathless pause, a suspended moment of time. Then a single person clapped, then another and another, until the auditorium erupted in a thunderous applause. The sound washed over her, a wave of warmth and acceptance, chasing away the lingering shadows of her fear. She opened her eyes, blinking against the bright lights. The blurred faces were now clear, their expressions no longer indifferent but filled with awe, admiration, and a touch of wonder. Diana's face, usually contorted in a sneer, was a mask of stunned silence. Susan stood there, bathed in the applause, a fragile smile blooming on her lips. The knot in her chest had finally unraveled, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. She had faced her fear, embraced her vulnerability, and found her voice. And in that moment, she knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within her soul, that she would never be silenced again. The stage, once a terrifying precipice, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could be free. The music, once a source of anxiety, now felt like a lifeline, a connection to something bigger than herself. And the silence, once a symbol of her invisibility, was now filled with the echoes of her own powerful voice. The gymnasium air, thick with the lingering scent of hairspray and anticipation, now vibrated with a different energy. The applause still echoed in Susan's ears, a phantom wave washing over her, leaving her strangely buoyant. She clutched the wilting bouquet of carnations, a gift from Mrs. Whitmore, their perfume a dizzying mix of sweetness and decay, mirroring the conflicting emotions churning inside her. The stage lights had been extinguished, plunging the corners of the vast room into shadow, but a spotlight still seemed to follow her, the warmth of hundreds of gazes clinging to her like a second skin. She felt exposed, yet strangely exhilarated. Just moments ago, she'd stood frozen, a rabbit caught in the blinding glare of headlights. Now, the fear had receded, replaced by a quiet hum of satisfaction, a flicker of something akin to pride. A hand touched her shoulder, warm and firm. "Susan, dear." Mrs. Whitmore's voice, usually operatic and booming, was now soft, almost a whisper. That was extraordinary. Susan looked up, her eyes meeting the older woman's, a depth of emotion swirling in their depths. Mrs. Whitmore's smile was genuine, a rare and precious thing. Susan swallowed, a lump forming in her throat. Praise, real praise, was something she hadn't known how to process. Her internal voice, usually a chorus of self-doubt, was strangely silent, almost stunned into submission by the unexpected turn of events. "I didn't," Susan stammered, her voice still shaky from the performance. "You didn't realize the power you possess," Mrs. Whitmore finished for her, her gaze intense. "That voice, Susan, it's a gift. Don't let it wither in the shadows of fear. Nurture it, cherish it. The world needs to hear you sing." Each word resonated deep within Susan, striking a chord she hadn't known existed. A seed of something new, something bold, began to sprout within her, pushing through the layers of insecurity that had choked her for so long. A wave of well-wishers surrounded her then, their faces blurring in a sea of smiles and congratulations. The same girls who had snickered and whispered behind their hands just hours ago now offered words of admiration, their eyes wide with genuine awe. Susan felt a strange detachment, a sense of unreality. Could this be happening? Was this her life now? Her internal monologue, finally shaking off its stupor, whispered cautious words of warning. "Don't get used to it. It's just a fluke. They'll forget about you tomorrow." But another, stronger voice, fueled by Mrs. Whitmore's words, countered no. "This is just the beginning." Then she saw her, Diana Wellington, standing at the edge of the crowd, her usual entourage nowhere in sight. Susan's initial reaction was a surge of anxiety, a tightening in her chest. She braced herself for a sarcastic remark, a veiled insult, anything to puncture this fragile bubble of happiness. But what she saw in Diana's eyes wasn't mockery, but something else entirely. Regret? Respect? Susan couldn't quite decipher it. Diana stepped forward, the gym's noise fading into a dull hum in Susan's ears. Time seemed to slow as Diana approached, her expression unreadable. The scent of her expensive perfume, usually a symbol of her power and privilege, now seemed to carry a different weight, a hint of vulnerability. Susan held her breath, every muscle tense. "Susan," Diana began, her voice surprisingly soft, devoid of its usual sharp edge. "I have never heard a voice with such natural talent." Diana paused, as if choosing her words carefully, each syllable heavy with an unspoken weight. What I did was mean," Diana continued, her gaze dropping to the floor, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over Susan. Surprise, confusion, and a flicker of something akin to understanding. Diana's carefully constructed facade seemed to crumble before her eyes, revealing a glimpse of the insecurity hidden beneath. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, stark and unexpected. Susan stared at Diana, searching her face for any sign of insincerity, but found none. The apology seemed genuine, a crack in the carefully constructed wall Diana had built around herself. Susan's internal monologue whirled, trying to make sense of it all. Is this real? Is she really apologizing? A part of her, still bruised and wary, urged caution. Don't trust her. It's another trick. But another part of her, a part that longed for acceptance and understanding, whispered, maybe, just maybe, she means it. Susan took a deep breath, the carnations trembling in her hand. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible above the receding hum of the crowd. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start, a fragile bridge across a chasm of hurt and misunderstanding. The gymnasium lights flickered overhead, casting long, dancing shadows across the floor. As Susan looked at Diana, a flicker of hope ignited within her, a tiny ember in the vast darkness. Maybe, just maybe, things could be different now. The metallic clang of Susan's locker echoed in the suddenly hushed hallway. A week ago, the sound would have been swallowed by the cacophony of chattering students, unnoticed, insignificant. Now it seemed to reverberate, drawing glances, whispers. Susan's fingers, still clumsy with the combination lock, fumbled slightly. "Why are they looking at me?" she thought, a nervous flutter in her stomach. It was a different kind of attention than she was used to, not the sneers and whispers that had followed her like a shadow for so long, but something curious, apprehensive, even admiring. The lock finally clicked open, and Susan quickly grabbed her biology textbook, avoiding eye contact. The scent of old paper and metal filled her nostrils, a familiar comfort in this new, unfamiliar landscape of her school life. The hallway buzzed with a low hum of conversation, and she could feel the weight of those glances, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. It's because of the showcase, she realized, her cheeks warming. The memory of standing on stage, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlights, the microphone cool against her palm, the melody pouring out of her, still felt surreal. It had been a risk, a terrifying leap of faith, encouraged by Grandpa Will's gentle hand on her shoulder and Mrs. Whitmore's unwavering belief. A leap that had landed her, not in the pit of humiliation Diana had so meticulously planned, but on solid ground, a ground of newfound respect and, dare she think it, popularity. "Susan," a voice called out, breaking through her thoughts. It was Sarah, her face beaming as she navigated the crowded hallway towards her. Before the performance, Sarah's approach would have been a small island of solace in a sea of indifference. Now, it felt different, warmer, tinged with a hint of pride. Susan couldn't quite decipher it. "Everyone's talking about your performance," Sarah said, her eyes shining. "It was amazing. I knew you could sing, but wow." Susan felt a small smile tug at the corners of her lips. Sarah's genuine excitement was a balm to the unsettling attention of the other students. It was different, she thought, recalling the power of her own voice filling the auditorium, the hush that had fallen over the crowd. The fear hadn't vanished entirely, but it had been replaced by something else, a thrilling sense of liberation. The next few days were a blur of unexpected greetings, shy compliments, and invitations to join different groups at lunch. Susan found herself navigating a social landscape she had only observed from afar. The whispers that followed her now were laced with admiration, the glances filled with a newfound respect. It was disorienting, like stepping into a world tilted on its axis. She still sought refuge in the quiet corners of the library, the familiar scent of old books grounding her in the midst of this swirling change. But even there, the whispers followed her, a constant reminder of the shift in her social standing. One afternoon, as Susan was walking towards the music room, a figure stepped out from behind a row of lockers, blocking her path. It was Diana. Susan's breath hitched. The sight of her tormentor, even now, sent a shiver of apprehension down her spine. But Diana's face, it wasn't contorted in its usual sneer. There was a flicker of something else there, something that resembled uncertainty. Susan's mind raced, trying to decipher the expression, searching for the hidden malice she was so accustomed to. Diana shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her gaze fixed on the floor. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words. Finally, she looked up, her eyes meeting Susan's. "There she is," she mumbled, her voice barely above a whisper, so unlike the sharp, confident tone Susan was used to. The girl with the amazing voice. Susan's heart pounded in her chest. What's she doing? She thought, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "I wanted to talk to you," Diana continued, her voice still hesitant. She looked away again, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her bag. About the showcase. What I did, it was mean." The words hung in the air, fragile, unexpected. Susan stared at her, speechless. She's apologizing? The thought felt alien, impossible. Diana Wellington, the queen bee, apologizing to her? A complex wave of emotions washed over Susan's surprise, disbelief, and a flicker of satisfaction. She had imagined this moment countless times, dreamt of Diana's downfall, of the moment she would acknowledge the pain she had inflicted. But now that it was happening, it felt different. The satisfaction was there, a quiet hum beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a strange sense of emptiness. Susan started, her voice catching in her throat. She hadn't prepared for this, hadn't planned for the possibility of an apology. All her mental rehearsals, all the sharp retorts she had crafted in her mind, suddenly seemed inadequate. "It's Sakai," she finally managed, the words feeling small and insufficient. Diana looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Okay," she repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. Susan nodded, a strange calm settling over her. It is okay, she realized. The hurt was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it no longer held the same power. Diana's apology, however awkward and unexpected, had somehow loosened its grip. The performance, the applause, the newfound respect, they had given her something stronger than resentment, something that allowed her to rise above the pettiness of the past. Diana lingered for a moment longer, as if waiting for something more. Then, with a small, almost imperceptible nod, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the bustling hallway. Susan watched her go, a strange sense of closure washing over her. The hallway noises, the chattering students, the clanging lockers, they no longer felt threatening, but simply there. She took a deep breath, the air filling her lungs with a sense of lightness she hadn't felt before. The girl who had once walked these halls with her head down, her heart heavy with fear, was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone stronger, someone who had found her voice, not just on stage, but within herself.